All right, welcome everyone to.
Wait, did it start? I don't think it
July
started
1st.
yet.
I thought you said you started it.
It's starting.
Okay, it says recording now. You can give a lovely intro.
Oh, mine
Make
doesn't
sure
yet.
make sure we include this part in the like YouTube
There,
video.
now mine says it's recording. Now we can.
How many Grafanises does it take to screw in a light bulb?
How much intro banter?
Yeah.
Kick it off, Owen. Go for it. You're gonna roll there.
Yeah. What is it? July 1st, 2021. Loki community call. Welcome everyone. We actually have slightly prepared for this one, more so than usual, which is I'm pretty excited about. And I think we're going to talk about the index gateway first, which, thanks Sandeep for that one. It's a new component in Loki, which was kind of put together pretty quickly, largely based around finally migrating all of our internal clusters to use VoltDB Shipper. And it's basically in part a large cost saving component. So what it does is it serves the index from object storage as a component. And so other components can request index queries from this new component, which you generally will have a few replicas of. And then it basically allows things like queryers and rulers to not have to download a large amount of index data, especially for long periods of time. And this means that you can run them as non-stateful components again, which is way easier. And also disk tends to be a really large cost for these components, especially as you scale out to a large number of IE queryers. So it's a pretty dramatic cost-saving benefit here and has worked out very well. The life cycle on it has been pretty quick in terms of development. And we already have them in prod. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's everywhere now.
Yep.
And
the big gain for us there and why we were so with every query you're downloading the index, some of our clusters with especially very heavy multi-tenant clusters will build a pretty reasonably large index file over 30 days. So we tend to pre-download a lot of index files, and our PV cost, or like the disk cost associated with those queries, was getting a little bit untenable. And every query has to download the same data. So that's all just been centralized because with the amount of index caching that takes place, there's not a huge amount of query throughput, like usually less than like 10 or 20 QPS to the index. So yeah, this is nice. And now queryers can run as deployments again and not stateful sets, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Is the index gateway stateful or?
Not
stable. Yeah, I mean,
stateful.
Not quite yet.
Stateful.
Oh, stateful.
In Kubernetes, we run it as a stateful set primarily to take advantage of disk volumes. But it basically pulls data that already exists in object storage and then allows you to kind of do that in one place. And so it just pulls the index from object storage, hosts it locally, and then we'll be able to basically feed queries through this new component. And then so our queryers will kind of use that now. Does that help answer that question?
So I heard yes. So it's kind of, I was just asking because I was curious, like, is it offloading the statefulness to this new component, basically?
Yeah, so there's generally kind of two parts here around state, right? Like we run it as a stateful set in Kubernetes, which allows us to kind of persist disk volumes, right? So you can reschedule them across nodes and things like that, which is very helpful. But like you could kill these things and delete the disks, and all the data is actually hosted in object storage. So they would just start up anew and pull it, and then and in that sense, right? There's not like any data loss problem.
Convenience thing.
Yeah, so that's kind of the other part that we generally care about for state, and so that's not really a problem. So it tends to be a pretty low risk addition here for a high benefit. Yeah. All right. I can share and we can do a little demo. So we have a tell me when everyone sees this.
Yep. Nope. Yeah, there you
Yeah, so there's an internal hackathon going on right now at Grafana, and Jen and I have been working together on a fun little tool, and we think it'll be helpful for the OSS community, and also want to use this as a way to kind of do a rough dry run for what we'll have to present internally next week. This is all very rough around the edges, so bear with us, but take it away, Jen.
Sure, yeah. So our team theme is Blahange. In case you weren't familiar, it's a plush shark, so there's going to be a lot of photos of that through the slides. But generally, like the project that kind of Owen and I wanted to take on here is helping sort of take some of the Grafana Labs like expert knowledge around how you would size and set up a cluster and make that knowledge more accessible to other people. So next slide, Owen. So basically, like we've seen some issues already, like in GitHub, with people kind of asking, like, hey, given a certain log ingest volume, what should my cluster look like? What kind of resources am I going to need to run this? And so right now, there's not great information out there. So probably what we see people is either like trial and erroring. So you either over or under provision, each of which has downsides, or maybe you just give up and you say, hey, I just don't understand this enough. So yeah, I just screenshotted like a couple of the issues that we saw where people asking for some of this support. And so this is kind of meant to help with that, because otherwise you will be like this very sad shark in this photo and just feel very overwhelmed. And so, yeah, like I said, even within Grafana Labs, we maintain kind of like a spreadsheet to try to help with some of this. But the spreadsheet can go stale, and even our spreadsheet is not as detailed probably as you'd need to like design an actual system. So we wanted to kind of provide that. And then the goal here again is like another pain point that's somewhat specific to Grafana Labs is like, even though we have a bunch of people that have a bunch of knowledge around how Loki should be run and sized, we actually have many different Loki clusters that we run, which are kind of special snowflakes. And then, the on-call engineer is, if they ever have to like increase a cluster in size, they're having to like do some math to figure out like, oh, okay, like how many more of this component do I add? So we just wanted to automate that for them. Therefore, we have what we are calling the definitely fake trademarked smart sizing tool that you as a user are able to give like, here's the ingest volume I anticipate, here's how long I'd like to retain data. And then it's going to give you resources, number of replicas of each component, and costs, rough costs, like assuming you're on like a cloud provider. We just took some constants from GCP. So I'll turn it over to Owen to actually show you what we have so far.
Yeah, let's see. So I have this kind of built locally, and you can feed in a few variables here, particularly around like how complex you want to get, what your cluster size is going to be, how many bytes you need to ingest, per second, and then things related to cost as well. So we can kind of show an example here, bytes per second. I know we run a cluster internally that has around 80 megabytes a second. Is, I don't know, like 7 terabytes a week or something. Here, and yeah, so kind of going down the list here, you can see things like required node counts. These are largely derived from like anti-affinity rules internally. So you don't want to schedule ingesters, for instance, with alongside other ingesters. And then you can also get things like cluster benchmarks from memory, both for the floors and for the ceiling, CPU, and then storage both on disk for your components, as well as how much you need in object storage for whatever your retention period, times whatever your throughput looks like. So ultimately, this kind of comes out with both a floor and a ceiling for costs based on all these constants that they're configurable. But I think Jen, you said they're based off
just
GCP right now.
GCP, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, which is how we run a lot of stuff internally. Most of our infrastructure comes out of Google. And then you can also break it down per component. So you can see, memory, CPU, floor, ceilings, how many replicas. And this will probably be where the tool stops for most people. Can be used to kind of resize clusters over time. But the really fun part, for me at least, is kind of what I want to show next, which is we can take this, but we kind of wrote this as a library internally. And we want this to really be, at least as an initial driver within Grafana Labs, as like a continuous planning tool that we can hook into our CI and CD systems to make sure that our clusters are always appropriately sized for the volume that we expect, and to also kind of force us to continually keep this tool up to date. This is my sales pitch internally right now. So we can also do things like templating, right? And so for those that may know or may not know, we vend a JSONet library for Loki, which is the tool that we use internally to deploy all of our clusters. And so you can actually take this cluster definition that we generate and then kind of overlay that into a set of JSONet overrides. And the idea here is, which I was frantically trying to hook up right before this call, the idea is that you then kind of would add this into a JSONet specification, and it would size all of your components, both in terms of replicas and as well as memory, disk, CPU, that sort of thing, according to whatever throughput and retention period you expect. And that's the end of the little demo here. So we'll go back. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that covers most of it, and want to make sure we leave time for other folks. I think the only thing we wanted to kind of hit on the next slide was a little bit is like, we will eventually probably put this out there, and what we'd like to see maybe is like folks in the community, like they can run with it with their own, like whatever they use for deployment. Like maybe you don't use JSONet, but maybe you want to write some sort of like Helm adapter that can take this output and then give you like the Helm chart that you want, or you just pipe it directly into like whatever your manifests are. So, you can see generally peak expected usage, right? Like in a Kubernetes world, that pretty much map to like your resource limit for a pod. So yeah, excited to see kind of if this is valuable for folks in the community and like what people could probably do with this downstream to make their deployment life easier.
Yeah. All right, I will stop. But yeah, if anyone has any questions around this, now's probably a good time. Can you auto scale clusters on these values? It kind of depends on what your internal tooling looks like. Like these aren't like auto scaling groups in something like AWS, for instance, right? Like they're more they're more constant, like generated definitions depending on kind of what your capacity planning would look like. And so we don't use a ton of auto scaling internally. We use a lot of kind of like ancillary tools to do CI and CD based on things that are more or less automated, but not quite the same cloud primitives that you may be familiar with. And this really helps us do things like scaling on, maybe metrics that aren't exposed by cloud providers, right? Maybe you have internal metrics that you use or that your applications expose. And so like the big one here for this tool in particular is retention and bytes throughput, right? Like how big does the fire hose need to be for Loki to be able to successfully ingest all of these logs and then query across them, effectively? And then how long do you want to store them? And you can kind of calculate a lot of things from that. So as for like auto scaling, it's probably more of a bespoke process that you would build on top of this tool.
Thanks, Owen and Jen. I'm pretty excited because I know from an operations standpoint, I would say we probably err on the side of being over conservative on how we scale things. So it'd be nice to have that be a little bit more reasonable. The shark is real, huh? So you took all those pictures, Owen? Was that?
I'll probably get some in. I haven't taken any yet, but I chose the team name.
What are the next steps? Like if someone wants to see the progress of this or keep up with it, where can they go look?
So I was deliberately sidestepping questions like, is this going to be in the main branch, right? Like, are we going to vend a tool? Because it's largely just been a side branch work project that Jen and I have been kind of putting together over a few days. I think that there's a lot of weight behind it. Like, we need to solve a lot of these problems internally, and I think that it's very valuable to have something like this externally as well. So I'm definitely going to be making the case to try to get this as official tooling. But obviously, Ed and some of the other Loki maintainers are going to get their fair share to stop me on that.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or feedback?
Yeah.
Other than, why would you tease us with something like this if we can't use it?
I mean,
and could be a good chance to at least say hey, do you think this is valuable? I guess if you're just I don't care, then just not worth the work.
Yeah.
You finish it.
Yeah, we're erring on the side of demoing very early here, right? My last commit was work in progress tagged probably 5 minutes ago, so cut us a little bit of slack.
So I added an update here. The Kavi's not on the call, but thanks to Kavi for fixing. I don't think we have an issue. Well, actually, we probably have numerous issues for it, to be honest. But the grafana.com/docs/Loki defaults to something we called latest, which was pointing to the unreleased versions of the docs. Basically, whenever we commit something to main, that gets auto deployed with the docs. And that's very confusing because the default landing page basically showed docs from stuff that wasn't released. That has been fixed now. So when you go to grafana.com/docs/Loki, you will land on latest still, but latest returns the latest release docs. This should be consistent with how Grafana is doing their docs as well. And there is a drop down in there that you can go pick next if you want to see the unreleased stuff, basically things that are continuously deployed. So hopefully that simplifies some of the problems that we've seen and saves people some time. I don't think we've talked about the pattern parser that Cyril put together fairly recently yet, because it all happened probably within the span of the last month, or at least us deploying it. So let me find the docs for that. But the pattern parser is exciting because it is the fastest Loki parser to date. So it is now faster than the log format and JSON parsers, which are faster than the regex parser. Parser is the way you turn your log content into labels at query time. And I definitely recommend you check this out if I can find the docs.
It's super good for things that have consistent structures. That historically you've had to write super complex regex parsers for, which are slower, as Ed mentioned, but also just incredibly tedious to write. So things like Nginx access logs should really be enabled by this new parser tool.
So so instead of having to write a regular expression for something like the common log format, which I've done, it's terrible. I'm sure if you've done it before too, it's in the common log format isn't necessarily common amongst different distros. So yes, this works very well for sort of, space delimited, or could be anything delimited, but kind of CSV probably would work just fine too for this, as a matter of fact. So that's another case. This is unreleased, so let me make a note of that. If you want to play around with this, well, you go sign up for Grafana Cloud, because it is actually running on Grafana Cloud. So
nice.
Because we've been continuously deploying, we do a release a week. So there's actually an image in here. I want to say How do we feel about K52? That should be reasonable. If you want an image. I will sort of caveat this. It has been a couple months since our last release, and don't just run right to prod with this image that I'm about to paste. In this section here. All right, now 52, I think is the. So these K releases we've talked about before. They're the releases we promote internally. So they have more stability to them than what's in main. But we sort of have to figure out a good way to communicate, because like once in a while we'll pull them if we have trouble with them. But typically a K release makes it through to prod. There might be multiple iterations of them too if we sort of re-release them in lower environments if we run into troubles. But that image there is run this in dev first. There's likely config flag changes or other changes, things you just want to be aware of. But the pattern parser, check it out. Like I said, you can go sign up for a free account on grafana.com or Grafana Cloud and play around with it there, or if you're already using that, or check out that Docker image. Alongside with that, we have, so just briefly talk about 2.3. I think that our tentative plan, this is the time of year that between our hackathon internally and GrafanaCon or GrafanaCon line last couple of weeks and PTO, that things do slow down just a bit. But I think the end of this month, maybe early next month, from a feature set, 2.3 is actually going to be really exciting. I just want to give us a little bit more time internally on things like custom retention and deletes to make sure we're happy with those, the pattern parser, and that we should be able to release those either in a beta fashion, which basically means that it should be in good shape, or just unencumbered with a beta flag. So that's kind of what we're doing, is getting our ducks in a row. Also, Karen, who we met last month, is helping us actually generate some release notes and better documentation around the release and make sure that the features that we're releasing have documentation. I actually just went looking for like the index gateway docs, and I don't think we have anything for that yet. So there's some gaps that we want to close there to do a little bit better job of giving people documentation for releases. So let's say here, I'll put this as early August. All right, so that's the sort of story for 2.3. I'm not sure who added the 8.1 thing about Loki, so
it's Grafana. Yeah, it's me. I should have added the name. But I was thinking about sharing some work that we've been doing, and that is probably and very likely going to be part of Grafana 8.1 release, which is scheduled for like mid-July. So it should be available in 2 to 3 weeks. And I will share my screen and show you what we've been working on, because I feel like for this release, we tackled a lot of things that was also mentioned here on community calls, and there were a bunch of issues that were upvoted quite a lot. So I hope I will make everyone happy with these like features that we've done. So here is the list of the things that is kind of in our backlog, but I will walk you through the issues and feature requests that are either already merged in the master or are in the PR stage. So we are feedbacking it, and they should be merged quite soon. So the first thing is, and like as you can see, some members of our community has already seen it, because it was like very upvoted feature, and that is support for this kind of pattern where you are basically, when you are querying template, when you are using template variables, you are using the series endpoint in Loki, and it allows you to basically create queries like this. And you are also able to use nested templating, which basically adds support for this kind of syntax where you are able to use the log stream selector and also specify label. So that is the first thing. Another thing that I feel like it was very confusing for our new users, but also for a lot of users, was the fact that if you use in your log query parser, we suddenly had a bunch of labels, and the filtering didn't work for the parsed labels. And it threw error because we were expecting it to be the real label, but it was parsed label. And we have tackled this. Actually, Cyril came up with idea how to kind of fix this without having to change anything in Loki and basically not much in Grafana. So as you can see, like here we have some log labels, and for example, this should be, let me see, this should be, oh no, because I'm not using the parser. So let me use the parser, run query. And now we have more labels, and we don't know which are actual labels, which are parsed labels, but we can basically parse for, we are basically able to filter for parsed and also for actual labels by this syntax. So that's another thing. Fix highlighting for logs when using backticks. We haven't updated the logic that was handling the highlighting in quite a while, and LogQL changed a lot. So we weren't handling a case when there were backticks. So basically, that's another change where we are handling this case when you have backticks or more complex queries, and you are able to show context in this case because highlighting is connected to the showing of context. In logs panel, we have added option to show common labels. So as we have a bunch of toggles where you can decide, like if you would like to see log details, unique labels, and so on, we have added option to see common labels as well. We have added, or it's still open PR, but we are soon to merge this where we are adding range variable that is currently supported in Prometheus, but it was requested also for Loki. So it adds support for all of these variables. This is also open PR. We are still figuring out the final UX UI stuff, but basically we are adding an option to prettify JSON and possibly also log format log lines, so it's more readable for the users. So instead of just seeing like this long string, you are able to see nicely formatted JSON log. And the last thing. I know there's quite a lot of nice updates, so I think 8.1 is definitely worth to try as soon as possible. But the last thing is adding ad hoc filtering in dashboards, and that's another thing that was possible in Prometheus, but not in Loki. So we have added this ad hoc filter where you can basically ad hocly specify label and value, and that label and value will be added to all of your Loki queries. So for example, to just demo this, we can use the debug. True. And we have a query that includes this label value pair. And that's all from me.
Can that be
amazing? Could
you specify that for things that aren't labels, but are like parse labels too?
Currently not. Currently, it's only labels, not parse labels.
Cool.
That's a lot, Ivana.
Yeah, y'all been busy.
That's so exciting. A couple things the backticks that's a Loki pro tip if you've never come across that before. If you use backticks, you don't have to escape double quotes. So that's really handy inside of certain, like especially line format. I use that one a lot where the line format itself will be wrapped in double quotes. But if you use templating functions inside your line format, regexes, so that you don't have to escape, very, very handy. So that's exciting that will address the formatting version of that. Man, I should have kept notes of the things. That's so much stuff. I don't know if you still have those PR windows open. Yeah, just throw each of those PRs in there because that's fantastic. I'm excited. I didn't realize all that stuff was getting fixed. The range one in particular, I'm really excited about because I still use Loki as a Prometheus data source to get access to range, and Ivana is tired of me doing that.
Also, one of the things that is not currently in Loki is the possibility to specify the step parameter. So yes. We are also, I'm not sure if will get to 8.1. I think it might, but if not, then 8.2 is definitely, it's definitely something we plan to work on very soon.
Awesome. Yeah, that I've run into that one. There's a couple of use cases around Prometheus where I force the step, right? So if you want to do like hour buckets or day bucket aggregations, you can force the step and force the range in the query to both be one day. And that's really handy. So that'll be really nice to be able to do that in Loki, in Explore, or in dashboards. Look at all that list. The JSON prettify log ones is nice to have. I've actually found myself when you use the JSON parser and you expand the log line, it's almost easier in some ways to read because the labels will basically list the contents, but that's not perfect because our JSON parser doesn't handle arrays currently. So it ends up just sort of dropping that data, and that's not the best experience. So having a prettifier will be nice.
I mean, you can also see in, as you said, like in log details, but that's like line by line. You have to open it for each line. So I have like a toggle for all of them. Could be nice.
The solution for putting the label filters from clicking the plus symbol as a filter at the end is really clever because that works because you can filter on both indexed labels and extracted labels in that pipe syntax. So it basically is a really clever way to. We have a long-standing issue around extending the Loki API to be able to disambiguate those parsed versus non-parsed labels, but we just haven't really. I don't know if there's a real reason other than revving APIs is kind of annoying. So this is kind of nice to not have to just kick that can down the road a little farther.
Yeah, true that.
Our API is speaking of, like, I swear I was in the docs the other day, and in our push API, there's still a thing in there that, like, a warning that says it's experimental and it could change.
Oh, really? Yeah.
We're at like Loki 2 now. We should clean that up. It's not experimental. It's extremely stable.
It is by far the most stable part of Loki.
The push API is never going to change.
Yeah.
Somebody asked a question about timeouts. I don't think it was us. Is there anybody here that wants to?
I think they left. I want to say Masood.
Okay. I can commiserate with whoever wrote this.
Yeah, I was like, maybe we just give a general answer and they'll just come back to the recording.
Yeah. So, and actually, for what this is worth, like we have a bug somewhere with Grafana 8 or our infra, but one of our environments right now is timing out queries with a 502 after like 10 or 20 seconds, and I can't figure out where it is, but there are a whole series of timeouts that exist between Grafana and Loki and within Loki, and it goes something like Grafana has a data source timeout, Grafana has a request timeout. There's the data source proxy timeout is the first one that I just said, and then a request timeout on Grafana as a whole. I don't remember exactly where that one plays. It's in the server config, I'm pretty sure. There is, then from there, what we run into, like I at home have Nginx between as a reverse proxy. If you have a reverse proxy, your reverse proxy is going to have timeouts. If you're using Nginx, there's a read reverse proxy and write reverse proxy that you both need to adjust. If you have, let's see, is there another one in there? I mean, you could have as many as you have components between. So like we run in Google and we have Google load balancer sit in front, and those have timeouts. And ultimately you get to Loki, and Loki has a few timeouts in here too. There are HTTP request timeouts in the server section. There's query timeouts on the query engine. And there are, I believe there are gRPC timeouts, although I think you'd be hard pressed to hit them. But anything can happen. So that is a poor documentation, but I've actually sort of recently ran into this myself. I wanted to write a blog post about it because I spent like a whole day chasing down. So if you use Nginx, for example, and you set a pool of upstreams, it has a default timeout in there that's for the upstreams. It's different than the reverse proxy timeouts. And it has a really neat behavior of when it times out, it tries the next upstream silently. So that's nothing to do with Grafana or Loki. It's just an Nginx behavior. But you see context canceled anywhere in your logs, that's likely because something closed the TCP connection between you and Grafana. And that's very likely your reverse proxy timeouts. Grafana itself should log at a debug level when the reverse proxy timeout or the data source proxy times out. And Loki will log. One of the other things you'll see a lot is Loki will actually return a query result after Grafana has timed out. So that's a good indicator that something upstream of you is in the way. So this is probably worthy of a blog post, certainly worthy of some better docs. Gateway, query frontend, querier, etc. Yeah, within Loki, there's not, like within Loki, if you're running it in microservices, I don't think you're likely to run into much for timeouts. Most commonly, you'll run into gRPC resource exhaustion errors, where the defaults in some of the cases for gRPC are like 16 megs, and big queries can exceed that.
Yeah, we need to document this both for the public and for some of our like on-call like playbooks and stuff internally. I know
that the defaults in Loki, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago a little bit, and I think we sort of tentatively agreed that we should try to favor the defaults to probably be closer to how our operating experiences are. I know that there's a number of cases where some of these have diverged and we've not gone back to sort of close that gap. Like we added override in our config, but it's not in the default case on it, or it's not the default for Loki. So yes, sorry, timeouts are annoying. And like I said, we have one now that I can't quite figure out. It did start with Grafana 8. That could be a coincidence, or it could be that there's a bug somewhere. Not necessarily in Grafana 8, but interestingly, it's not really that either, because I have two Grafana 8s connected to the same data source, and one does this and the other one doesn't. So I'm not sure yet. I'll get back to you. I don't have much more to say about timeouts other than there's a lot of them, and we could certainly use to have more tools to help. I would say, like I said, watch out for context canceled on the Grafana logs or in Loki's logs, because that often indicates something has closed the connection. A closed TCP connection results as a context canceled message in Go, which is what our stuff all runs on. All right, Owen. Number one, most
it's finally happening.
Requested, most demanded.
Yeah. Pretty happy. We're finally like starting implementation on removing the ordering constraint for Loki. This goes way back to some kind of early issues, like 2 years ago, and then probably like a year and a half ago, Ed and I one night like sat down and we're kind of like just running through the motions, seeing if this was like kind of feasible, and realized that, oh hey, like it could actually work pretty well. and it's been a very slow process to kind of close that loop. But
we've been building a lot of suspense around this. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
We really trying to stretch this out, maybe to Loki 3 in the fall. No, I'm just kidding.
It should make everything a lot easier for, I mean, people running who aren't running Promtail or are running on ephemeral, like hyper ephemeral infrastructure, like Lambda functions, or who just spin up infrastructure for jobs very quickly, with a high degree of high frequency. It'll help people using other agents like Fluent that don't really account for Loki's previous ordering constraint very well. Or people who want multiple aggregation layers for their logging pipelines. It should just make a whole lot of use cases dead simple. And yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Probably worth pointing out that the biggest reason that it doesn't exist now is because it's two things. It's a very nice simplification for Loki's code base, and it's the most performant way to ingest logs. So by removing the ordering constraint, it will come at a cost, right? So inserts are going to be slower, and memory consumption on the ingesters is going to increase. So that's kind of what Owen's been trading off, is trying to figure out what the exact story for out of order that we want to support is, infinite ordering type things. Loki's actually pretty good at this already. Like chunks themselves can be sort of whenever. It's just inserting within one chunk needs to be in order. So, I mean, so far, I guess you've done some benchmarking here, Owen, to see what,
Yeah. Honestly, things are looking very, very good at the moment in terms of associated costs, resource costs that are looking to be pretty negligible. But we'll have to get a little bit farther along before I say that with a high degree of confidence. But
without a shark in your lap.
Yeah, exactly. But initial kind of feedback looks like no one's going to have to alter any of their deployments. So hopefully we can finish that way.
Is your ideal vision then that you would just default this on for everyone, as opposed to saying only turn it on if you know that you're going to have out of order issues?
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of design goals here is to make this as close to zero cost as possible for things that do come in order.
Okay.
There's going to be a little bit, but it's that use case is actually looking pretty strong. And the parts of the code base that would change, especially for in-ordered writes, we're making certain things slower, but it's such a small part of the pie anyways, in terms of and this all happens on the ingesters, in terms of the ingesters, CPU cycles, for instance, that it's that part looks pretty negligible at the moment.
Nice.
But I should get a little bit farther along, before I start making grand claims. So, grain of salt.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
Zero performance cost.
Uh-oh.
It's faster. It's faster than it was before.
Yeah.
All right. That's it. We're at the end of the list. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about? Comments?
We'll probably talk about this tool's progress or whatever happened to it at the next call. We don't. I just didn't really have much to put in other than the demo right now, because it's very much in flux, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more mature next month.
Take odds on whether 2.3 will be released by this call next month.
I'm not participating in that one.
You've been hanging out with us for a little while. I've never every date I've ever given for a release is wrong.
Yeah.
That's why I put this one out a little farther in the future. So
Yeah.
Learning.
You get to be wrong more slowly. Yeah. All right. We should
mean time to. All right. Let's call it there. Thanks everybody. It's so excited to see more folks join in, considering we're still not doing a great job of advertising this. But just feel like it sneaks up on. Isn't it like months that sneak up on you? Like you look at the calendar and it's like, didn't we just do this yesterday, last week? So that's good. We got a lot going on, a lot coming. 2.3 is gonna be exciting too. I'm very excited for Loki's future. So thanks everybody. We will see you in a month.
Take care.
We need outro music. See ya.